Mariam's life is the story of courage in the face of impossible odds. Born in Afghanistan, she grew up in a secret Christian household where faith was whispered in the shadows and danger lurked behind every prayer. Discovered as a believer in her early 20s, Mariam was imprisoned, tortured, and pressured to renounce Christ. Yet, even in chains, her faith refused to break. Her journey carried her from the darkness of prison cells to a daring escape across mountains, and later to exile abroad, where she became a voice for the persecuted. But Mariam's heart could not forget her homeland. She returned in secret, teaching hidden believers and planting seeds of hope that outlived her. Though her fate remains uncertain, whether martyr or survivor, her legacy endures. To countless Christians in Afghanistan and beyond, Mariam is remembered as the silent flame, a woman whose faith could not be silenced and whose story continues to inspire generations to stand firm in the light of Christ. Mariam was born into a world where silence was safety. Her family lived in a small mud brick home on the outskirts of Kabul. To their neighbors, they appeared ordinary, quiet, hard-working people who followed the customs of the land. But inside their home, when the lamps were low and the night was still, Mariam's father would bring out a worn Bible hidden in the lining of an old flour sack. By candlelight, he would read softly, his voice trembling with both fear and devotion. Mariam grew up memorizing verses, whispering prayers into the folds of her pillow. To her, faith was not a public ritual. It was a secret lifeline, a fragile seed watered in silence. When she turned 22, the dangers became real. One late afternoon, while drawing water from the village well, Mariam's lips moved in prayer. A neighbor noticed. At first it was suspicion, then whispers. Within days, those whispers grew into accusations. She is a Christian. One night, armed men stormed her home. Her mother cried as they dragged Mariam into the street, accusing her of betraying her people and dishonoring her family. They demanded she renounce her faith and recite the Islamic creed. Mariam's voice shook as she answered, "I was born in this land, but my soul belongs to Christ." I cannot deny him her defiance was met with blows. She was thrown into a cold cell with stone walls and a rusted iron door. The air smelled of damp earth, and a single barred window let in a sliver of moonlight. The days blurred together. She was beaten with sticks, denied food, and mocked by guards who told her she had been abandoned by God. Some nights she fainted from exhaustion, yet even then her lips moved in prayer. She prayed not only for herself, but for her captors, whispering, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Weeks passed. Her body weakened, her once bright eyes sunken, her arms covered in bruises. But inside, a strange fire grew stronger. She remembered her father's words. "Faith is not the absence of suffering, Mariam. It is the light that carries you through it." One morning, she was dragged before the village elders again. Her face was swollen, her clothes torn. A crowd gathered, waiting for her to break. The elder raised his hand and thundered, "Deny this foreign god, and you will live. Hold on to him, and you will die." The square fell silent. Mariam looked up, blood drying on her lips, and spoke with a voice steadier than anyone expected. "You can strip me of everything, my home, my family, even my life. But you cannot take away Christ from my heart. I will not deny him." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some spat at her. Others turned away, uncomfortable. The elders, furious, ordered her back into the cell, declaring that harsher punishments awaited her. But by then, Mariam's defiance had already planted a seed. Among the villagers, a few whispered about her courage. Among underground Christians, her name became a prayer. They called her the Silent Flame, a woman whose faith refused to be extinguished. Her fate remained uncertain. Some say she died in prison. Others believe she escaped with the help of secret believers. But her story endured, whispered in hidden gatherings, reminding others that even in Afghanistan's darkest valleys, faith could outshine fear. Mariam's days in the prison? Mariam's days in the prison dragged into months. Her body had grown frail, her wrists scarred by shackles, but her faith remained like iron. Each night she sang hymns under her breath, her voice faint but unbroken. Unknown to her, whispers of her defiance had spread through Kabul's underground Christian network. A small group of believers risking their own lives began plotting to free her. Among them was Farid, a former soldier who had secretly converted years earlier. He had heard of Mariam's courage and could not bear to leave her to die alone. One stormy night, Farid and two others bribed a guard who had grown sympathetic. With keys hidden beneath his cloak, the guard unlocked her cell and whispered, "Go before I change my mind." Mariam stumbled out, barely able to stand. Farid caught her, wrapping her in a cloak to hide her frail figure. Together they moved through dark alleys, avoiding checkpoints until they reached a safe house, an underground church hidden beneath a rug shop. There, Mariam collapsed to her knees. For the first time in months, she prayed in the company of others, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "Lord," she whispered, "you carried me through the fire. Let my life now be yours completely." But freedom in Afghanistan was never secure. Word soon spread that she had escaped, and authorities began searching house by house. Farid urged her to flee across the border to Pakistan, where Christian aid workers might help her find asylum. The group prepared false papers. The night before departure, Mariam couldn't sleep. She sat by the window looking at the moon, torn between two fears: the fear of capture and the fear of leaving her land, the soil where her ancestors were buried, the people she longed to see saved. When morning came, Mariam made her choice. "I will go," she told Farid, "but not to hide. If I live, it must be to strengthen others. If I die, let my blood speak where my voice cannot." Their journey was perilous. Twice, soldiers stopped them at checkpoints. Twice, Farid's quick tongue and forged documents saved them. At last, they reached the rugged mountains near the border. As they climbed through the rocky paths, Mariam's strength gave out. She fell to her knees, gasping for breath. "Go on without me," she begged. But Farid lifted her up. "No, sister. You carried the cross. Now let me carry you." After days of hardship, they crossed into Pakistan. There, hidden among refugees, Mariam finally tasted freedom. Aid workers helped her find shelter, and whispers of her survival spread again among persecuted believers. To them, she was no longer just the silent flame. She was a living testimony that faith could outlast chains. Mariam never forgot her homeland. In her small room in Pakistan, she gathered women who had also fled, teaching them the scriptures she once read by candlelight. Some she helped escape abroad. Others she encouraged to return secretly, to shine where darkness still ruled. Her life remained marked by scars, both visible and hidden. Yet, when people asked her why she endured, Mariam would only smile and say, "They tried to bury me in silence. But Christ raised me in his light. My story is not mine. It belongs to every believer who dares to stand." And so Mariam's legacy spread, not as a victim of torture, but as a survivor who turned her pain into a testimony. Her flame did not die. It only grew brighter. Years passed. Mariam built a fragile new life in exile. In Pakistan, she lived quietly, teaching refugee children to read and writing letters for widows who had lost everything in the war. Eventually, international aid workers helped her relocate to Europe, where she finally had the freedom to worship openly without fear. But freedom felt heavy. In the bustling cities, churches rang with music and believers prayed without whispers. Mariam was grateful, but her heart remained restless. She thought often of Afghanistan, her mother's face, the dark cell where she had suffered, the women still trapped in silence. One evening, she was invited to speak at a church in Germany. The pastor introduced her as a survivor of persecution. Mariam stood before the congregation, her hands trembling. She told her story, the prison, the torture, the night of escape. Many wept, others applauded her courage. But Mariam raised her hand. Do not weep for me. Weep for those who cannot stand here today. Weep for the ones still in chains. My life is not special, my Savior is, and his people are still suffering. From that day, Mariam became a voice for the voiceless. She traveled across Europe and North America speaking at churches and conferences, raising awareness of the persecuted. She met politicians, journalists, and aid workers. Some dismissed her as just another refugee story, but those who listened closely saw the fire in her eyes, the same flame that prison walls had failed to quench. Yet Mariam's heart still pulled her eastward. After 10 years abroad, she made a decision few understood. She returned, not openly, but in secret. With the help of underground networks, she slipped back into Afghanistan under a new name. Her homeland was darker than before. Checkpoints everywhere, suspicion in every corner, the Taliban's grip suffocating hope. But Mariam had returned not as the frightened young woman she once was, but as a teacher of courage. In basements and abandoned houses, she gathered small groups of believers, men, women, and even children. She read scripture to them, just as her father once read to her. She taught them songs of faith, quiet enough to not wake the neighbors. She reminded them that Christ himself had walked through suffering and had promised never to abandon his people. Sometimes she remembered her prison cell. At night, when the fear of discovery pressed heavy on her chest, she whispered the same prayers that had carried her through torture. But now she was not alone. Around her were dozens who had drawn strength from her story. Her presence became a quiet revolution. The believers of Kabul began calling her Morward, the Pearl. To them, she was both fragile and unbreakable, a symbol of hidden beauty that no persecution could destroy. Whether Mariam lived to old age or was eventually discovered and martyred remains a mystery. Some say she vanished one night, never seen again. Others insist they saw her teaching in the mountains, her voice as steady as ever. But one truth endured. The flame she carried spread. Her courage birthed courage in others, and in the heart of a land where faith was hunted, Mariam's life proved that no prison, no regime, and no cruelty could silence the light of Christ. After Mariam disappeared, stories of her life spread like seeds scattered in the wind. Some whispered she had been captured and executed. Others believed she had fled once more. But in every telling, one truth remained. Mariam had refused to let fear decide her faith. Among Afghanistan's hidden Christians, her story became more than memory. It became a lifeline. Fathers told it to their children by firelight. Mothers whispered it into their daughters' ears as they hid from patrols, and pastors in secret house churches spoke her name when encouraging new believers. Remember Mariam, the silent flame. If she stood, we can stand. One young girl named Layla, just 12 when she first heard Mariam's story, kept repeating the words, "You can strip me of everything, but not of Christ." Those words became her anchor years later when soldiers raided her home. She survived and, like Mariam, carried the fire forward. In the mountains of Bamiyan, a small underground fellowship painted a cross on the inside of a cave wall. Beneath it, they wrote a single word in Dari, Morwarid, Pearl. To them, it was not just a name. It was a reminder that faith, though hidden, shines in the darkness. Mariam's story even reached beyond Afghanistan. Refugees who fled across the borders carried it into Pakistan, Iran, and eventually as far as India and the Middle East. In secret gatherings of believers from many nations, her testimony was shared. Some who had never met her felt as though they knew her, and her name became a prayer on their lips. 20 years after her disappearance in a remote Afghan village, a young man named Daoud smuggled in a handwritten copy of the New Testament. On the first page, in faded ink, were words scrawled by someone long ago. Faith is not the absence of suffering. It is the light that carries you through it. He didn't know the name of the woman who had written it, but it was Mariam's father's words, preserved by Mariam, and now passed on again. By then, Mariam herself was gone. Whether she died in a hidden grave or lived her last days teaching in the shadows, no one could say. But her life had already outlived her body. She had become more than a person. She was a story, a flame passed from soul to soul. And long after her captors' names were forgotten, long after the regimes that tortured her crumbled, Mariam's witness endured. In the silence of secret prayer rooms, in the songs sung quietly at night, in the trembling faith of those who chose Christ despite the cost, Mariam still lived. Whether Mariam's life ended in martyrdom or in quiet exile, her story could not be silenced. The regimes that once tortured her crumbled, but her faith remained alive in countless hearts. In the silence of Afghan nights, hidden believers still gather. They whisper hymns, they pray in secret, and they remember the woman who taught them that even in the darkest valley, Christ's light never dies. And so Mariam's flame, once just a flicker in a hidden home, burned across generations. Not a silent flame anymore, but a fire that spread. A fire that even death could not quench. Mariam lived. Mariam endures. Mariam is every believer who chooses light over fear.